We'll take a break for August, and we'll resume after Labor Day in September. I think that's the plan. So I just want to wish you all a very relaxing, restful summer, rest of the summer, and you can always review our studies on Kosher too. You can always, if you ever want to use to study Torah, and there's no shiur, you can always go online. There's plenty of stuff online. What I wanted to focus on today in the KUZARI, on the bottom of page 270, and what we were talking about is the idea of prayer. And our focus last time was to talk about the different modalities of prayer. And we expressed the idea that people pray with different things in mind. And what I find to be helpful is to ask myself when I'm in the midst of davening, am I incanting? Am I saying words in the hopes that those words will go up to Shamayim without really connecting to the meaning of the words? Or is this avodah shebalev? Is this really something that's coming from my heart, and I'm really in some way intellectually, emotionally bonding with Hashem? And I think that there's value to both different kinds of prayer, but sometimes the reason why we lose touch with our prayer is because we don't have clarity on what kind of prayer we're engaging in. That was really the function of the idea of sort of delineating a bifurcation in the way that we pray. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi views the pious person's prayer as an avodah shebalev. He does view it, not to discount the value of an incantational prayer, a prayer that provides a segula, shall we say. But there's a deeper meaning to prayer and a value to prayer. And you'll see from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi that the pious person views episodes of interaction on a spiritual plane in his religious life as sort of a process of purification. And this, I think, is such an important idea, is that from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's perspective, when we engage in religious activity, we're actually purifying ourselves from the things that we accumulate over the course of a day, or over the course of a week, or over the course of a month. We engage in certain religious rites or activities in order to expunge some of the accumulations that are unhealthy, like going to a mikveh, going to a spa, and rejuvenating ourselves. And that's what I'd like us to look at today and see how he approaches the concept of prayer from that perspective, and how that's going to tie into other rituals that we do periodically in the very same way. So if we start with paragraph number 10, the order of prayer nurtures his soul as food nourishes the body. He, referring to the pious person, prays to sustain his soul just as he eats to sustain his body. The spiritual blessing that he gleans from prayer stays with him until the next prayer service, just as the sustenance from one's daytime meal lingers until he eats at night. The longer his soul goes without prayer, the more it is darkened by the influence of worldly affairs. So he's comparing prayer to eating. We eat 3 times a day. We pray 3 times a day. Why? Because just like the body needs to be nourished, so too the soul needs to be nourished. And when you finish your morning prayers, the morning prayers are supposed to stay with you. They're supposed to linger. Just like breakfast lingers in your body and sustains you, the shacharis that you davened this morning is supposed to sustain you until lunchtime or a little bit, later in the afternoon, until you're ready to daven mincha. And mincha sort of helps to sustain you further spiritually because you become empty like you engage in all types of mundane activities, and so we sort of lose the residual effect of prayer. So that's why we need to pray every few hours in order, just like we need to eat every few hours, in order to continue the sustenance. And he says that the more we engage in things that bring us down from our spirituality, the more prayer is necessary. So, and that's why he says in the next few words, this can be even worse if he needs to be in the company of young men, women, and evil people. Now, this is not to connect women to evil people, but it's an unfortunate way of categorizing it. But he's basically saying that if a pious man needs to be in the company of women, they'll drag him down. They could potentially drag him down, right? Because of first of all, the view of women in those days, you know, because women are just going to talk about shopping and getting clothes and things like that, and a man, right, doesn't need to be dealing with that all the time. That could be one explanation. Or just because of the natural tension between the genders and so forth, where he has to hear things that will cast a heavy shadow over his bright soul, and where he will be subjected to coarse matters and songs that turn away the soul. These disable him from ruling over his soul. During prayer, however, he is able to purify his soul from all prior impurities and can chasten it for the future. So it has a dual function, prayer. It cleanses me from the past. In other words, just like hunger. If I was so hungry before, I felt that I was empty. My stomach was empty. My spiritual stomach was empty. And not only was it empty, but it's harmful to my body to have this emptiness inside of me. So the prayer cleanses me, rejuvenates me, nourishes me, and does so for the future as well. It fortifies me for the future to make sure that the next iteration of my mundane interactions with people who are going to bring me down, I'll be protected to whatever degree I can. So the more that I interact with dangerous things or counter-spiritual things, the more that I need to focus on my prayer so that my prayer will help me. We normally don't think of prayer this way, but it's a very interesting approach to what tefillah is all about. We normally associate tefillah as a way of serving Hashem or as a way of connecting with Hashem. But now we've gotten a new approach to the whole idea of tefillah. Tefillah is my nourishment and it's my remedy for the accumulation of yucky stuff, spiritually yucky stuff, and helps to fortify me going forward when I have to immerse myself back into the outside world. Okay. As we're going to see in a number of places in the KUZARI, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was no stranger to the mundane world. He talks about it in quite a few places in the KUZARI. And I've mentioned to you in the past that he himself had interactions with the outside world. He was not one of these rabbis who sat in the holy mountain all day. He was very much engaged in the culture of his time, in the social milieu of his time. And that's why, and this comes forward out, you know, in his poetry, that he was quite worldly. But he also acknowledged that there's a price for worldliness, that there's a price for engaging in the outside world. You can listen to music, but sometimes the lyrics of that music have a coarse effect upon a soul. And so, optimally, the pious person removes himself from that environment. But what if he can't, or what if he, for whatever reason, he just finds it too difficult to remove himself from that environment? So, engage in a counterbalance effort to engage more in prayer, more in spiritual things. Immerse yourself in the tefillah so that you feel that sense of purging. So if you were listening, I mentioned before, I don't know if this should go on the video, but you know, I have Sirius radio in my car. Does anyone have Sirius XM in your car?
Yes.
So they just recently added the Beatles channel. I don't know if I...
It's good.
So that's my vice. You know, we all have vices. Some people, you know, do very bad things. My very bad thing is I love a good Beatles song once in a while. I have to confess. It's not something maybe that a rabbi should talk about.
Why not? We all have to do cheshbon nefesh. It never ends.
We all have to do cheshbon nefesh, right?
Yeah. So
Okay,
why
so
not?
for me,
Nobody's perfect.
and you know, that's true. Nobody's perfect.
See, that's the woman they were talking about.
That's right. That's right. So, but one of the reasons why I relate to what he says in this paragraph is he says there are things that cast a shadow upon you when you have to listen to, when you listen to certain songs. Did he say this? Did he talk about the songs yet? That's going to come in the next page. Songs and poetry he's going to talk about in the next page as well, where he has to hear things that will cast a heavy shadow over his bright soul. Okay? So,
When we're listening to music, are you listening to the lyrics, or are you...
well, you know, that's the thing, is that, you know, the whole idea behind the lyrics is a lot of the, you know, there are some poskim who say that you should not listen to any song that talks about love because it could arouse within a person sinful thoughts. But the truth is that if you're married, I think about my wife. So for me, it's, you know, I think anyone who's married, I think that they could use that argument, you know.
She loves you, yeah.
I certainly hope so.
I would think just that, Rabbi, I would think just the opposite. If you're married, I think that you don't think about your wife, but you fantasize about other women.
I mean, that's an interesting theory.
Well, most men that are married that I talk to, like, you know, I always hear my husband say that, oh, he saw this most beautiful woman on the subway. Like, you know, I hear this all the time.
Okay.
I mean, I don't take it personally. I mean, you know, you have to appreciate beauty for what it is.
Right.
Yeah,
But-
speaking of that, don't tell your wife.
Got an email from Adrian Gold on Facebook about this whole essay about physicality and spirituality. It's so amazing. It's such a good article. The girl who does Rapunzel, I don't know if you're familiar with, she has a site, and it's with all the scarves that you wear on your head. Rapunzel. She's the one who wrote it. It's so good. I just sent it to a few people.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for letting us know about that. Anyway, so every person has to choose their. I'm not advocating that everyone should listen to secular music. As some of those of you
It
know.
has Jewish sources, too. Like Simon and Garfunkel. They were yeshiva boys.
Yeah, well, okay, that's a little stretching it just a little bit.
What about, like, let's say Star Trek? There were a lot of Jewish
But
nuances.
in other words, I think that there's a lot to draw from the secular world. That's the way I've lived. I was raised that way. I've lived my life that way. I grew up in the music industry in California. So that, for me, is the way that I'm able to reconcile this, is because learning Rebbe Yehuda Halevi's world, I think that he lived in both worlds. And he therefore viewed his Yiddishkeit as a way of purifying himself from the necessary engagements with a world that is less than perfect, but has value, but nevertheless requires us to purge ourselves every once in a while.
But does he acknowledge anywhere that truly great music can elevate you? I mean,
I think he does. I don't remember the exact quote, but I think the very fact that he acknowledges that listening to music as part of a person's life is in itself is basically saying, listen, you're going to hear music in the course of your life. He's not advocating asceticism. Remember, that was the one thing that he rails against. He says that's not the way God wants us to live. There is natural beauty in the world, and part of that natural beauty is art, is music, right?
If you listen to something like the Brahms violin chair, I mean, it could just take you.
It can take you, it can transport you, absolutely. And everyone has that, but at the same time, you know, there are different views to this whole philosophy. There are many Jewish thinkers who are very austere in their view of the outside world of art. And they feel that the very fact that it comes from a foreign source means that it should not be engaged. And even listening to Beethoven and Mozart, for some Jewish thinkers, is problematic because you are drawing into yourself something that comes from a foreign source that is not pure. I don't subscribe to that. I don't live my life that way. But I do want to put this out there, that there are different approaches to this philosophy. Yeah.
Putting aside music for a minute, I hear what he's saying, but I also feel like there's a danger in thinking that something positive that you do in Yiddishkeit can inoculate you against bad things that are outside in the world. In other words, kind of like the idea of Tovel B'Sharetz B'Yado. You can't think that if I daven, then I can do something that I think is questionable. You have to judge each item on its own merits, and you can't think that doing a good thing is going to inoculate you.
I think that's a very important point. Right. In other words, to take it to an extreme example, a young yeshiva bacher who's going to spending time on internet porn can't say, well, I can purge myself by davening well, and then I can go back to what I've been doing. If it's unquestionably sinful, if it's unquestionably bad for the neshama, you can't rationalize it by saying, well, I'll just go to the mikveh before and after I do it. And the mikveh in this case would be the half hour that I spend in tefillah. 100%. 100%. And I think that that bears being spoken out very carefully. And that's why I gave the example of listening to secular music. Listening to secular music is not patently sinful. It is an opportunity to engage with something that's part of the non-spiritual world, but at the same time can be uplifting and can bring joy and can stir certain things within the human experience within all of us. But at the same time, we recognize that it may have some byproducts that may not be healthy, right? She loves you, yeah. Or I want to hold your hand, right? Or, you know, or even references to drug use, you know, that we all know are in some of those Beatles songs. Well, it doesn't mean that by listening to that song, I immediately want to endorse the use of LSD, right? But at the same time, knowing that there may be some lyrics that allude to LSD, okay, so it's not such a healthy thing, because subliminally, who knows, right? So therefore, again, it's not definitively evil.
Well,
right?
That's why I said forget about the music, because I don't think those lyrics have any effect on you. It's just the music that you like, the tunes. But I see every day from people thinking they can do something that's frum and good, and then that allows them to go do something that's not good. For example, if they daven in a shul where the rabbi wears white socks and a long bekasha, and he's very frum, then they can go do whatever they want on Sunday.
that's the vicarious living of, vicarious religious life, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I hear this, it kind of worries me a little bit. There's no inoculation.
Right. Okay, point very well taken. Point.
Depends how
Catholicism, where they think it's going to be a Catholic confessional.
That's
which
right.
is what Judaism is not. So
Like
you can
say
tell
10
them that.
Hail Marys and call me in the morning,
Right.
and you can do what you want.
It's not a
Correct.
confession.
Correct. I think the point is very well taken, yes.
I think it matters in what background you came from. Like, for example, you said you grew up in the LA, music industry. But if you grew up in, let's say, Williamsburg, and you were very insular, and everything was like, there was hardly any Goyish influence, you're not yearning for those things because you weren't exposed to them. And all you know is Torah, and the same thing in these neighborhoods in Yerushalayim.
Right, I agree with you. The
Yeah.
only danger that happens, what we're seeing as a burgeoning phenomenon in some of those very, very cloistered communities, is that it used to be possible for those communities to be hermetically sealed from the world, and then the system worked well. Today, it's harder and harder to hermetically seal off the members of any community because of the internet, because of the global community, because of so many different factors. And so what happens is that if children are not at least sat down with and explained what these things are, if they discover them from sources other than their parents, it becomes like this forbidden fruit that they've discovered, and they completely breach and go away from their community. So that also has to be taken into account.
If you have these Jewish communities, how are we all going to be unified when there's other Jews that, they don't even know Torah? Or, I mean, it doesn't seem like that's supposed to be the Jewish way that...
Well, okay, but there's different philosophies to that. There are some Jews who view it as their duty to protect their community, and some view it as their duty to go out and work with other Jews. Both of them are acceptable. Yeah.
Coming back to music, I teach piano, and I have several students who are Kolel families' children. And there's one little boy who's 8 years old, and he's very good, and he's a beginner. He said to me, "Why are you teaching me Goyshka music?" So I said, I was taken aback. I've never been asked this question. So I said, "Where did you get that from?" He said, "Well, my older brother said, 'Why is your teacher teaching you Goyshka music?'" I said, "What do you call Goyshka music?" I played him a piece of a Beethoven sonata, and he was blown away. I said, "This is not Goyshka music. This is beautiful music. It's real stuff." I said, "But I have to teach you this way because in the Jewish music, the technical teaching is very bad. The way it's written is bad." And I gave him one little thing, and he's happy with that. I said, "But I have to teach you the way I teach." So he bought that because he was quite impressed.
Well, this is a young man who is going to continue to be conflicted,
Yeah.
and he's in danger, and not because of you, but he's in danger because he's getting mixed messages. And it's very important for you to bring this to his parents'
Oh, I did.
attention.
And they were quite on my side.
It's not enough for them to be on your side.
Yeah.
It's not a question of right or wrong. It's a
No.
question of this young man being presented with conflict. And his older brother may be telling him, "You're not really from unless you shun secular music."
Yeah.
And then he's going to be made to feel like he has to choose between frumkeit and beautiful music. And that's where the crime comes in.
Yeah.
That's the criminal part of what's going on in some frum communities.
I even went as far as where a piece was called a Christmas melody. I called it a Hanukkah melody, and I was editing the book,
Yeah.
I couldn't help it. These books are all written that way.
Okay.
I just want to say that I think it's a very small percentage of the Hasidim that go off the derech because of this conflicting messages. If it would be a large percentage, the Hasidus would completely fall apart. There's like hundreds of thousands of people who live in segregated environments in New York and in Israel. So what you're talking about is a very small percentage of the off the derech.
I don't fully agree with what you just said. There are those who completely leave their communities.
But it's a small percentage of the whole
One
Hasidim.
second. There are those who completely leave their communities, and those are the ones that are a very small percentage. But what I've noticed in my observations, and again, I admit that my observations may not be fully accurate, but that there's a very, very large number of people who stay within their communities who have stopped believing in God or stopped believing in the strictures of their community, but remain faithful to the external trappings of their community just because it's more convenient to stay within the community.
How are you made aware of these kind of people? Like, how do you know what's in their heart?
Because of my
And
conversations
self-wisdom.
and interactions with them. And I see large populations of it.
Yeah.
I see large populations of it. So it's just there. And anyway, there's a lot more to discuss, but that's not our topic for today.
I just wanted to say, don't you think that it shows a lack of what's the word? I just lost it. A lack of self-control, self-reliance, or self-belief in your own religion and what you're believing in. It shows a lack of I lost the word. A lack of self-confidence in what you say you believe in. If you have to be restrained in that way, like, shouldn't people be strong enough in their beliefs that they should be able to go to university and take a course just because you're in the same classroom as somebody who's not religious?
I don't think that that's a fair criticism, because you have to look at the place where these people are. If they're young, I don't want my child exposed to all different kinds of cultures at a certain age, because he doesn't have the wisdom yet, doesn't have the discrimination yet. So everyone wants their child to be protected from exposure, from overexposure.
But I mean,
Right.
at least.
But at a certain age, there does need to be, there's a maturation, and people feel confident in their own skin and who they are, their identity as a person, their religious identity, and then it should be acceptable. And there are many people who do, even within those cloistered communities, who do venture out and retain faithful to their religious identity, and at the same time go out into the secular world. There's nothing. There are a lot of people who do that. I'm just saying that for those who feel that that's an unhealthy thing, that creates problems. It creates, again, this forced choice, which is really a falsity, that you have to choose between the secular and the holy. You don't. The human being is capable of containing the secular and the holy. We do it all day, and we have to nurture ourselves, not inoculate, but nurture ourselves with spiritual moments over the course of the day, so that when we do go out into the secular world, as we necessarily must do, we'll be fortified.
Exactly. But
Okay.
I mean, not isolation doesn't do that, right? Only what you're
Right,
saying does.
right. Rabbi Yehuda Levi does not believe in isolation and in seclusion. Okay, let's go on to the next paragraph. As long as a full week does not go by, he can successfully utilize prayer alone to rectify his soul, and he can use the physical exertion of his daily work to chasten his body. However, over the course of a full week, certain excessive and darkening physical forces accumulate, and one cannot purify and cleanse himself from them unless a special day of divine service coupled with physical rest is established. Now we have a new explanation of what Shabbos is for that is completely in line with the function of prayer. Prayer and Shabbat are of the same genre. They are both there to cleanse us and to fortify us for the future. Okay? Only through the Shabbos can the body make up what it lacked during the 6 other days of the week, and it is thereby rectified for the future. This also gives the soul a chance to identify what it was lacking when the body was distracted by work, by the mundane activity. The Shabbos, then, is a day when the soul is healed from its previous illness and fortifies itself to ward off future illness. This is similar to what Eov did for his sons each week, when he said, "Perhaps my sons have sinned." The reference to Eov and his sons is a reference to the first chapter of Eov. Eov used to offer karbanot, sacrifices for his sons. And the Gemara says that he did that because his sons would come home, would go out and party. The sons were youthful. They wanted to go see the world. And he wanted to make sure that just in case my sons have sinned, let me offer a korban to atone for their sins, and also to spiritually strengthen them for the future. So this is keeping in line with the story of Eov. But that's really a side point. The point that he's making is that Just as prayer provides us with nourishment over the course of the day and helps to purge whatever we've accumulated over the last few hours, that's not enough. We need a full day of purging to purge us of the 6 days of accumulated unhealthy living or physical living that we've accumulated over the course of the week, and also to fortify us for the coming week. So Shabbos has both a curative power and a prophylactic power of strengthening us for the coming week. So that's the function, and that's why it's completely consistent with tefillah. Tefillah and Shabbos. My only comment is to make an observation. There are many people who are we are taught in halacha that a person has to enter into tefillah in a purified state. And that's why some people actually, some men go to the mikveh every morning in order to purify themselves in preparation for prayer. Some only go on Erev Shabbos, and some don't go at all. I'm just saying there are different ways. The idea of purification before tefillah and purification when going into Shabbos is all about the awareness that what I'm about to engage in is in itself a purification process. So we normally think of, I better go to the mikveh before I daven so that I can be pure when I daven. But from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's perspective, it's not that I'm going to the mikveh in order to purify myself, because the tefillah itself is the purification. But let me go to the mikveh to remind myself about what this process of tefillah is. Let me go to the mikveh before Shabbos to remind myself about what Shabbos' effect is supposed to be. So it's almost a prelude, it's a precursor to what it actually is happening when I daven and when I observe the Shabbat. Yes?
Do people go to the mikveh before Yom Kippur?
Yes, that's actually a halacha that all men must go to the mikveh. That's the halacha that only men have to go, but some women have a minhag to go every Erev Yom Kippur as well, the night before Yom Kippur. It's not a widely practiced minhag. Yes?
I must be misunderstanding this example about Eov's sons, because this is exactly what I was saying I didn't think a person should do. My question is, if they were doing something they shouldn't at the parties, stop the parties. Don't, then say, I can bring a korban to make up for the parties. Judge each thing on its own merits.
Right. So you're right. The example that he's giving is when Eov was not in control. He couldn't control what his sons were doing at the parties. And so therefore, there's different ways of understanding it. The simple way of understanding it is that perhaps my sons have sinned means perhaps they behaved in ways that I would not be proud of. And so therefore, in order to inoculate them or atone for them, I'm going to offer a korban which will atone for their past and also perhaps fortify them in the future so that they should not be inspired to continue this behavior, or they should be inspired to perhaps curb their behavior in the future. That's when he wasn't in control. But we're not condoning their behavior. We're just saying that in situations where a person finds that he's overdone it, or perforce I've indulged in the physical world, that's what the function of Shabbos is. That's what the function of prayer is. To bring us back to the place, to recalibrate ourselves to a place where we know that we're supposed to be. Again, it's not condoning the sin. It's just saying there are times when we go overboard. And it's not that it's okay to go ahead and do this as long as you observe Shabbos, but we have to recognize there are times when we've overindulged. There are times when we've drifted too far away from our spiritual core. And that's what tefillah is for. That's what Shabbos is for. And as we're going to see as he goes along in the course of these paragraphs, there are so many of these kinds of periodic observance that are of the same genre. That's why he's going into Rosh Chodesh. Then he's going to talk about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Right? Everything has a role to play in the process of purging and spiritual fortification. We're approaching that time of year where in a couple of months it's going to be the high holidays. So during this time of year, It's like now been around 10 months when we've accumulated the schmutz of the course of the year, and we should be ready for that purging process of a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's been a long time since we've spent a whole day in shul thinking about ourselves, our lives, repentance, removing the bad things that we've done. Right? So a pious person says, I'm really looking forward to Yom Kippur this year because I could really use it. Not that, okay, now that Yom Kippur, we're not saying that on Motzah Yom Kippur, okay, let's go party and go crazy. It's that we know that we know because of we're imperfect beings, and we err over the course of the year. Okay, we'll hold it here, and let's take a look at the Parsha.